the Sunshine State's dark secret, Florida. When you hear that name, you probably think of sunny beaches, clear blue water, and happy people on vacation. It's a place where people go to get away, to make their dreams come true under bright, endless skies. But hidden beneath all that sunshine, there's a different kind of story, a cold secret whispered by the very roads that crisscross the state. These weren't stories of fun trips or peaceful retirements. They were echoes of a grim hunt, a scary game played not by some wild animal in the swamps, but by someone much more unsettling because she was human. Imagine those long roads winding through palm trees and past bright motel signs, usually full of excitement and the promise of adventure. Now, picture them covered in an unseen fear, a strange feeling in the air as evening turned into night. For a time, these very roads became the hunting grounds for a ghost in human skin, Aileen Wuornos. Her name, now written in the sad history of true crime, once belonged to a woman living on the edges of society, a wanderer trying to survive and find some peace. But somewhere along those lonely roads, something truly awful happened. Her struggle to just stay alive turned into a terrifying string of violent acts, changing a vulnerable person into something the public couldn't understand. America's most deadly female inmate. Her story isn't a simple path from being innocent to being completely bad. Oh no, it's a tangled mess of sad events, a big knot of pain and desperation that, when you pull it apart, shows a picture made with the darkest colors you can imagine. Colors of brutal ongoing abuse that hurt her deeply from a very young age, leaving wounds that never healed. Colors of constant struggle and a deep need for connection, for safety, for anything that felt like a normal life. And then, surprisingly, undeniably, colors of cold-blooded murder. Tonight, we won't just tell you what she did, even though that's important for understanding the terrible mark she left. Instead, we're going on a trip into the dark parts of her past, carefully pulling apart each painful piece of that complicated picture. We will look closely at the deep thoughts and feelings that shaped her, trying to understand, not to excuse, but to grasp the woman behind the violence. We want to shine a light on the huge impact she had on the history of true crime, forcing us to face uncomfortable truths about people who are victims, about making choices, and about what evil truly is. Get ready to uncover this disturbing story, piece by agonizing piece, and see how the Sunshine State was forever changed by a darkness few could have ever seen coming. To understand Aileen Wuornos, we must first journey back to her beginnings, to a childhood that offered little warmth and much despair. Born Eileen Carol Pittman on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan, her life was marked by instability from its very first breath. Her biological father, Leo Dale Pittman, was a convicted child molester who later committed suicide in prison. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, abandoned Eileen and her older brother, Keith, when they were mere children. They were left in the care of their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos. But this was no haven. Friends and neighbors would later paint a grim picture of Eileen's upbringing. Her grandfather, Lori, was reportedly abusive, and her grandmother, Britta, a severe alcoholic. The details are harrowing. By the tender age of 11, Eileen was already engaging in sex work, trading sexual favors for money, beer, and cigarettes. This wasn't a choice. It was a desperate act of survival in an environment devoid of protection or love. The innocence of childhood was stolen, replaced by a harsh reality that would forever scar her. At just 14, Eileen became pregnant. The father, according to neighbors, was an older adult, a friend of her grandfather. The child was given up for adoption, a heartbreaking echo of her own abandonment. Soon after, she was kicked out of her home, forced to fend for herself. She lived in the woods, hitchhiked across the country, often under assumed names, a nomadic existence driven by a profound sense of rootlessness. Her early life was a relentless cycle of trauma, abuse, and neglect, shaping a young woman who would come to believe the world was a dangerous place. and that trust was a luxury she could not afford. By the early 1980s, after the death of her brother from cancer, Aileen found herself in Florida, drawn to its trenchant underbelly. Here, she continued to work as a prostitute, a profession that offered a precarious living but placed her in constant peril. Her life was a revolving door of petty crimes: illegal possession of firearms, forgery, assault, robbery. Her arrest records often noted her attitude poor, a revealing glimpse into a woman already filled with resentment and anger. In 1986, Aileen met Tyria Moore at a bar in Daytona Beach. Their relationship quickly became intense, a beacon of connection in Aileen's otherwise desolate life. Tyria offered a semblance of stability, perhaps even love, that Aileen had never truly known. But even this bond, however significant, couldn't erase the deep-seated trauma that plagued Aileen. Their relationship became intertwined with Aileen's criminal activities, as they sold stolen items at Florida pawn shops, further solidifying Aileen's path on the wrong side of the law. It was through these seemingly small transgressions that law enforcement would eventually begin to piece together the horrifying puzzle of her later crimes. A receipt found at a pawn shop bearing Aileen's thumbprint linked her to stolen items, a thread that would ultimately lead police down a dark and twisted path. The stage was set for the monstrous acts that would define her legacy, acts that she would later claim were born out of a desperate need for self-preservation. Between late 1989 and late 1990, a wave of terror swept across central Florida. The bodies of 7 middle-aged white men were discovered, each shot to death, their cars stolen. A chilling pattern emerged: robbery, murder, and then the disposal of the victim's vehicle. This was the work of a serial killer. But unlike the typical profile, this killer was a woman. Her name, unknown to the public at the time, was Aileen Wuornos. Let us name these victims to remember the lives that were brutally extinguished. Richard Mallory. The first victim was 51-year-old electronics store owner Richard Mallory. His body was found in December 1989, several miles from his abandoned car. He had been shot multiple times in the chest. Wuornos would later claim Mallory was her first kill and that she acted in self-defense, alleging he had beaten, raped, and sodomized her. It was later revealed that Mallory had a prior conviction for attempted rape, a detail that would fuel debate in her defense, though it wasn't presented at trial. David Spears. Next, in June 1990, the new body of 43-year-old construction worker David Spears was discovered in Citrus County, shot 6 times in the torso. Charles Carskadden. Just days after Spears, 40-year-old part-time rodeo worker Charles Carskadden's body was found in Pasco County, shot 9 times. Wuornos was later seen with his car and had pawned a gun belonging to him. Peter Seams. 65-year-old retired merchant seaman Peter Seams vanished in June 1990. His car was found weeks later, abandoned in Orange Springs, while his body was never recovered. Witnesses reported seeing 2 women, including Wuornos, near his car. Troy Boris. August 1990 brought the discovery of 50-year-old sausage salesman Troy Boris in Marion County, shot twice. Charles D. Humphreys, a retired Air Force major, former police chief, and child abuse investigator. 56-year-old Charles Humphreys was found dead in Marion County in September 1990, having suffered multiple gunshots to the head and torso. His car was later found in a different county. Walter Antonio, the last known victim. As the bodies mounted, a massive manhunt was launched across Florida. Investigators meticulously pieced together clues, from pawn shop records to witness sightings. The stolen vehicles and the items pawned from them proved to be critical. It was Aileen's distinctive thumbprint on pawn shop cards, used under an alias, that finally gave law enforcement the break they needed. The pursuit was closing in. On January 9, 9, 1991, Aileen Wuornos was apprehended at a biker bar in Harbor Oaks, Florida, on an outstanding warrant. But the real prize for investigators was still out of reach. Her girlfriend, Tyria Moore. Police located Moore in Pennsylvania and, in a method that drew criticism, used her to gain a confession from Aileen. Tyria was granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation, a decision that would later be scrutinized for its ethical implications. What followed was a series of chilling confessions. Aileen admitted to the killings, detailing how she had shot each man. However, she consistently maintained that she had acted in self-defense, claiming her victims had either raped or attempted to rape her. These confessions, while providing answers to the victims' families, also opened a floodgate of questions about Aileen's psychological state and the nature of her crimes. Was she a cold-blooded killer, or a woman driven to extreme violence by a lifetime of abuse and a perceived need to survive? Aileen Wuornos' trial for the murder of Richard Mallory began in January 1992. The case immediately captivated the nation, sparking intense media scrutiny and public discussion. The prosecution painted a picture of a remorseless serial killer preying on unsuspecting men. They presented evidence of the stolen cars, the pawned items, and Aileen's own confessions. Aileen, often erratic and defiant in court, insisted on her self-defense claims. She alleged that Mallory was her first victim and had brutally assaulted her. However, the judge ruled against allowing evidence of Mallory's prior conviction for attempted rape, severely limiting her defense's ability to support her claims of self-preservation. This decision would become a significant point of contention in later appeals. Despite her self-defense assertions, Aileen eventually expressed a desire to plead guilty, stating she couldn't get a fair trial due to intense media attention. While the court explained the implications of a guilty plea, including the waiving of her self-defense claim, Aileen maintained her stance. This contradictory behavior, pleading guilty while simultaneously asserting self-defense, highlighted the complexities of her mental state and would continue to be a subject of intense psychological analysis. Psychological evaluations were ordered, with some experts concluding she suffered from borderline and antisocial personality disorders, but was competent to stand trial. These findings, while acknowledging her mental disturbances, did not negate her legal responsibility in the eyes of the court. On January 27, 1992, Aileen Wuornos was convicted of the first-degree murder of Richard Mallory and sentenced to death. She would receive 6 death sentences in total for her crimes. Aileen Wuornos spent over a decade on Florida's death row, a period marked by further instability and continued media fascination. During this time, she was legally adopted by Arlene Preo, a born-again Christian who championed her cause and believed her claims of self-defense. This unlikely relationship became another peculiar chapter in Aileen's story, attracting further media attention through documentaries like Nick Broomfield's Aileen, The Selling of a Serial Killer, which explored the exploitation surrounding her case. As her execution neared, Aileen's behavior became even more unsettled. In a dramatic turn, she began to retract her self-defense claims, stating she needed to go to her death with a clean conscience. This sudden shift left many puzzled and further complicated the public's perception of her. Was it a genuine moment of clarity, or a final desperate act from a deeply disturbed individual? Despite lingering questions about her sanity and the fairness of her initial trial, Aileen fired her attorneys and dropped her appeals. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Carol Wuornos, at the age of 46, was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Her final words, delivered just before her death, were as enigmatic as her life. "I'd just like to say, I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, on the big mothership and all." I'll be back. Aileen Wuornos' case has become a cornerstone in the study of female serial killers and the complex interplay of trauma, mental illness, and criminality. Forensic psychologists have wrestled with the question: was she a cold-blooded psychopath or a severely traumatized woman who lashed out in violence? While she exhibited some psychopathic traits, such as a lack of remorse initially and impulsivity, many experts argue that borderline personality disorder (BPD) and post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) played a more significant role in shaping her behavior. Her intense fear of abandonment, unstable self-image, impulsive actions, and extreme emotional reactivity are all hallmarks of BPD. Her severe childhood trauma, the sexual abuse, the abandonment, the physical neglect likely contributed to her hypervigilance and violent reactions to perceived threats, aligning with symptoms of PTSD. Unlike male serial killers often driven by control or ritualistic compulsions, Wuornos' murders were frequently impulsive and emotionally charged. Her narrative of self-defense, while debated, cannot be entirely dismissed when considering the documented history of abuse she endured and the dangerous environment she inhabited as a sex worker. The justice system often viewed her as a calculated killer, but a deeper psychological lens reveals a severely damaged individual responding to a world that had consistently failed and harmed her. Aileen Wuornos' story continues to resonate long after her execution. She remains one of the most infamous female serial killers in American history, inspiring numerous books, documentaries, and films. Charlize Theron's Academy Award-winning portrayal of Wuornos in the 2003 film Monster brought her story to a global audience, prompting a deeper, albeit fictionalized, look into the complexities of her life and crimes. Her case ignited discussions about the death penalty, the treatment of female offenders, and the profound impact of childhood trauma on criminal behavior. It challenged preconceived notions of what a serial killer looks like and forced society to confront the uncomfortable realities of exploitation and violence against vulnerable individuals. Aileen Wuornos remains a haunting figure, a stark reminder of the dark corners of the human psyche and the devastating consequences of a life steeped in violence and despair. Her story is a cautionary tale, a complex narrative that continues to provoke thought and debate, urging us to look beyond the sensational headlines and delve into the deeper, often uncomfortable, truths that lie beneath. The story of Aileen Wuornos is not merely a chronicle of murder. It is a profound examination of the forces that shape a life, the choices made, and the societal structures that often fail those most in need. From a brutally abusive childhood to a desperate existence on the fringes of society, Aileen's path was fraught with peril long before she ever pulled a trigger. Her claims of self-defense, while never fully accepted by the courts, speak to a deep-seated fear and a distorted sense of survival, born from years of victimization. As we conclude our journey into the life and crimes of America's most deadly female inmate, we are left not with simple answers, but with a lingering sense of unease. Aileen Wuornos was a product of a broken system, a victim who became a perpetrator, a woman whose story will forever serve as a stark reminder of the fragile line between victim and villain, and the enduring human capacity for both immense suffering and unimaginable violence. Her legacy, for better or worse, continues to echo through the corridors of true crime history. For more of true crime stories like this, comment and subscribe for more videos.